Welcome to Strive Dialogues. Today we have with us Lieutenant General C.A. Krishnan, former Deputy Chief of Army Staff, GOC 4 Corps, and he has been through thick and thin of the entire Indian Armed Forces service life. I do not want to recount all his laurels and achievements. Suffice it to say that unlike unlike a typical defense officer, he got into doing a lot of work in rare earth materials, which is quite a surprising thing. So I would really categorize him as scholar general as of now, sir. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much for those kind words, Dushant.
Sir, before we start off, I'll just give a brief overview as to why we are doing this particular show. The audience, you would have heard about some chip wars taking place between US and China. A lot of restrictions were laid down by US on the semiconductor industry of China. Thereafter, Chinese also reacted by actually going after companies like Micron and even Foxconn also. So in fact, in Micron, they actually arrested a few of these their employees on the charges of spying, etc. So there has been some kind of a simmering of tensions between US and China. What what does that have? What does that have in store for India? We will briefly discuss that also. Sir, with those opening comments, sir, since our audience is primarily a non-tech non-tech audience, they would also like to briefly understand as to what are semiconductors and what goes into making of a chip. How are they two related, sir? Floor is yours, sir. Opening comments by you on this particular question, sir.
Thank you very much, Dushant. I think that's a very fine, boundary that you've drawn for getting a very non-technical perspective. I think it is essential that we know just a little bit, general information about. Just to know a little bit what an semiconductor is and how does it actually evolve from the basic raw material to a like chips. Everyone knows they power everything, smartphones to laptops, cars, washing machines, communication system. There is no end to it. Actually, every modern commercial electronic equipment today is powered by a chip. It's very interesting. In 2020, 1 trillion chips were manufactured, more than a trillion. That is almost over 130 chips per person living on Earth. And we all have heard about some chip shortage which came about during the pandemic. As a the backlog and the impact of that in 2021, actually the auto industry, cars, 11.3 million cars were short supplied in 2022, 2021, and 7 million in 2022. It's yet to catch up, come back to their to meet the demands readily. Also, something which not many people would have heard is that in Raytheon, in 2021, there were reports facing semiconductor shortages for Javelin and Stinger missiles. So, with that as the backdrop, let's just see what actually is a chip. Generally, we all have a picture of a small fingernail or a postage stamp size thing, which is a chip. And yes, that is the chip. But that small finger stamp size little disc sort of thing, which carries about billions of transistors on each one of them. And the chip features are measured in what is called nanometer, which is a billionth of a meter. Logic gates today are measured, 3, 5, 7 nanometers. And just to put it in the perspective, human blood cell is about 7,000 nanometers in diameter. A flu virus is about 100 nanometer in diameter.
Okay.
The latest, the iPhone 15 Pro will be carrying the most powerful processors of 3 nanometer. The present ones, iPhone 14 has a 5 nanometer uh, processor. No, there are the types. There are different types of chips. Just in very general way, what the first type is the logic one. Now, logic is the brain. That is the brain which actually processes information into a complete task. The one logic chip which all of us know is what is called the CPU, the central processing units. We now
Okay.
also have what is called GPUs, which is the graphic processing units. Then for AI purpose, we have what is called the neural processing units and all. So all of them fall into the logic processors, logic chips. The next category is what's called the memory category, memory chips. They are again of two types. One is dynamic, which is works only till the time the device is on, which is called the DRAM, dynamic rapid access memory, which saves data only while the device is on. It's basically for the applications which we load onto it for running the computer. The other is called the the non-volatile, where you full store the documents, the memory, photographs, and documents and things like that. The difference is that the RAM, the dynamic one, is a little faster. The ROM, the other one is the non, the non-volatile one is a little slower. The applications, the next category is what's called the application specific uh, chips. They perform simple single tasks, not simple, single tasks. It could be a generally repetitive task. An example of a simple ASIC, the application specific uh, chip, is reading barcodes. And a complex, a little more complicated one would be used for, let's say, in the Bitcoin mining. And the last, the fourth category, the broad category, is what is called the SoCs, that is system on chips. These are integrated chips. They are combines number of chips and circuits. They have the memory and the logic on the same one, and they combine graphics, audio, camera, video, Wi-Fi, all these processes. Then a word about computing power. Between 1955 and 2015, the increase has been 1 trillion times. So
Okay.
we can just visualize what the changes brought about by chips. And I think we would have most of the people would have heard that the Apollo moon mission, the navigation computers worked on 32 bits of RAM and about 589 bits of read-only memory. And the smartphones which we use today are 100 times more processing power than them. They have a million times more of RAM and about 7 million more times of read-only memory. All this has been enabled by the advancements in chips. Now, computers process data. It is estimated that by 2020, the world was producing about 175 zettabytes. Now, one zettabyte is about TB, 1 TB. This is about 175 zettabytes per year. Now, to get a correct idea about that, if you were to store these 175 zettabytes on the old DVDs, the DVD stack would have been long enough to circle the Earth 222 times. So that's the kind of data that we are talking about, and what the computers or the modern chips have enabled us to do. And coming to the annual global sales, today it's estimated that there are about 575 billion to the tune of sales, chip sales. It is expected to touch 1 trillion by 2030. And just to bring it to an Indian context, we import about 24 billion worth today. It is expected to go up to about 80 billion by 26 and about 110 billion by 2030. Now, very briefly, what goes into making a chip. The first part is called designing. The chip starts with a silicon block, and then before even that, the designing takes place. Now, designing is like an architect. working along with the interior designer and deciding everything that a building should have: interiors, exteriors, the pipelines, the electric connection, the tiles, uh, and everything, planning it for the user. No, that's what the chip designer does. And all this is done using very high end specialized softwares by people who are highly trained in that. So this is called the designing part. Next is the manufacture, which in the chip parlance is called fabrication. Now, fabrication is a very, very critical process. It starts with a silicon block. It is sliced into very thin wafers with using about 99.9% purity silicons, and the wafers are just about zero point 0.5 millimeter thick. That's about five hand heads or hair strands put together, so which are arranged one on top of the other. So it is those very thin salami slice that they work on. The first process that they go through is what is called deposition. That is, there is a small coating made on them using conducting, insulating, or semiconductor material. The next process again has got another coating which is called photoresist coating, which is a chemical which is very, very sensitive to ultraviolet light. Now these chemicals are highly specialized material, which only a handful of companies in the world produce. The Japanese actually have the near monopoly in this. Now, having done that, the third process is what is called lithography. Now, lithography is again extremely important. We will see it as we go forward. Lithography machines in the world, actually, it's a total monopoly of almost just about one firm. Now, what the lithography machine does is, it's like it throws the ultraviolet rays on that wafer which we talked about. Uh, Throwing ultraviolet rays which will it creates image. It dissolves the coating on the wafer wherever the light falls. So, and it has to, we've just talked about a billion transistors on a 1 inch by 1 square inch chip. So the entire the circuit on that is image is put on it using a lithography machine. And
Okay.
after it goes through the lithography process, next is the etching process. Etching is
Mhm.
the lithography. The lights would have actually made the images on the chip. Now that has to be washed either using chemical washing, wet washing, or using gases. Again, highly specialized these chemicals and these gases. Very few firms in the world can make them. And using them, it's sort of cleaning the channels, to make the image of the circuits. And next process, so the manufacturing involves all this. The next process, again, it's a set of process called AT&P. That is assembly and testing and packaging. Again, extremely important. This is not like screwing and assembling. These very thin wafers have to be stacked one on top of the other. They have to be interconnected. The testing for large number of parameters have to be done, and then they have to be packaged. So that's the journey, in very, I've rushed through it actually very briefly, as from a non-perspective idea to get a non-perspective idea. That's the journey of a chip, a silicon chip, from a simple chip to a chip, to a IC or a computer chip that we understand.
Thank you, sir. I think that was quite a elaborate thing, at least for the non-technical guys, to actually understand what is semiconductors. I got some requests on the uh, on the on the comment box for speaking in Hindi. So what I'm going to do is very briefly in 3 4 lines explain
Yeah.
to our audience what exactly Jan
Okay.
Krishnan said. So basically what he has covered is कि सेमीकंडक्टर क्या होते हैं और उसमें उसके बाद जो चिप्स हैं उनको बनाने का तरीका क्या है। तो दीज वर द टू थिंग्स व्हिच ही कवर्ड। पहले ही आपको पता है वॉल्स और इस तरह की चीजें हुआ करती थी। अगर आप एक उस जमाने के अगर 10-15 साल पहले के कंप्यूटर लेंगे तो एक कंप्यूटर को अगर आप खोल देते तो मेरे ख्याल से 3-4 फील्ड्स के बराबर वॉल्व लगाने पड़ते, तब जाकर के आप उस कंप्यूटर को यूज कर सकते थे। बट आजकल बिकॉज ऑफ नैनो टेक्नोलॉजी, नैनो मतलब मिनी, मिनी के बाद भी, माइक्रो के बाद भी, देयर इज समथिंग कॉल्ड नैनो। छोटे छोटे ट्रांजिस्टर्स बनाए जाते हैं जो कि एक सिलिकॉन ब्लॉक में, एच सिलिकॉन ब्लॉक पे रखे जाते हैं। और इसकी वजह से, जैसे उन्होंने एग्जांपल दिया कि एक स्क्वायर इंच के सिलिकॉन बॉक्स पे 1 बिलियन ट्रांजिस्टर्स लग सकते हैं। और इसको अगर आप खोलेंगे तो ही उन्होंने बोला कि दुनिया के कितने चक्कर लग सकते हैं उस इनको वो करने के लिए, क्या बोलते हैं, खोल के अगर ऐसे लगाना हो सीरीज में। तो ये एक बहुत ही डेलिकेट टेक्नोलॉजी है। बाद में देखेंगे कि इसकी कीमत ज़्यादा नहीं होती है, वेरी सरप्राइजिंगली। लेकिन इसकी ज़रूरत इतनी होती है कि अगर ये नहीं होगा ना, तो आपकी जो टाटा टाटा नैनो है या टाटा ईवी है, इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल है, वो एक छोटे से अगर ये चिप नहीं हुआ तो पूरी की पूरी गाड़ी खड़ी हो जाएगी। तो इतनी इम्पोर्टेंस है इसकी। इम्पोर्टेंस ज़्यादा है, कीमत कम है, प्रोसेसिंग डिफिकल्ट है। अगर मैं एक एक छोटे से हिंदी में बोलूं, कीमत कम, इम्पोर्टेंस ज्यादा, प्रोसेसिंग इज हाईली 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 डिफिकल्ट। उसकी माइनिंग से लेकर के अगला क्वेश्चन जो होगा, आवर नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज बेसिकली ऑन दैट, सर व्हाट इज द इकोसिस्टम of making the chips. Essentially, what I want you to cover is supply chain and the choke points, as also the entire manufacturing ecosystem where things can go wrong and where things need to be handled with care. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you for translating it. I think I trust you to do that because I may may not be able to do it in such brief in using the correct terms. Thanks for that help. Supply chain and choke points. Actually, you explained it extremely well in Hindi. The entire crux of computer chips lies in that the global semiconductor production chain is a very complex and integrated process. It's not easy to disentangle it, disaggregate it. Now, the most you can say that out of all the industries, this is the most uh, disaggregated supply chain. When you come to the different positions that the supply chain goes to, but despite being so disaggregated, it is controlled by just a handful of countries in a handful of companies in a handful of countries. And the five major global semiconductor producers, the biggest producers are also the biggest importers. They
Yes,
export as well as import. And the biggest players are Taiwan, South Korea, China, Japan, and US. Now,
correct.
I will just show you some figures before I say why are the exporters also big importers. So, if you can kindly pull up the first slide. No, this is the one before this. Yeah, thank you. If you see the on the left, the those are exported by. We'll just take the example of Taiwan. Taiwan exports 12.3 billion worth to Japan. It exports 52.4 billion worth to China, 2.5 billion worth to US, and 11.9 to South Korea. That is Taiwan's export. Now you come to
Correct.
Taiwan's import. It imports 10.9 billion worth from Japan, 22.7 billion worth from China, about 5.1 from US, and about 17 billion worth from Korea. So all these five players are also the biggest importers. So why does it happen? I'll touch it as we go along. Can you please pull up the next one? Now, another very important thing about the chip manufacturing is, now here are the figures given for average price per chip exported from the source country. So you see that for the average price that the US chip is about $2.16 per chip exported. Now you see Taiwan, it's about 1.08. Uh, South Korea is 1.08. Sorry, Taiwan is 0.32. Japanese is 0.13, and China about 0.19. Now this is thanks. Thank you, Dushin. This is indicative of the fact that not all chips are equal. No producer specializes in the entire spectrum of different chips, and so even the largest exporters have to rely on significant levels of import. Another striking feature is that global semiconductor production is on an average. Uh, you just saw the average price. So what it indicates is that China and Japan, they specialize in producing simpler chips, which are
Okay.
generally used in automobiles, household appliances, and consumer goods, etc. These are
Correct.
mass produced but low value. US and South Korea produce very highly specialized chips, and these are complex, high value. They import, but they have to import low value chips, huge quantity. That is their disadvantage also. China is also the largest export destination for all other chip producers. If you had seen in that figure, which table which we had seen, the largest export from all those countries goes to China. And another fact that comes out is that Taiwan is the global manufacturing center for chip manufacturing, and chip manufacturing is referred to as fabrication. So Taiwan is known as the global fabricator. South Korea also, the figures are very high because South Korea is also, it designs and fabricates. It does both. So the chip industry, like you had past made a mention in the question that uh, chip industries has a large number of choke points. Now,
Yes.
uh, now these choke points come by way of specialization of the different processing stages of the chip. I'll quickly touch upon that. First is
Okay.
the raw material. The raw materials required are silicon, germanium, and gallium arsenide. Now, silicon is, by the way, the second most abundant element on Earth after oxygen. But the silicon required for this are very high purity.
Purity.
So, therefore, you can generally use what's available in US and Germany are the major suppliers of this. But the quantity required is very less. For the billions of microchips, for the trillion microchips that we talked about, in which were traded in 2020, only about 30,000 tons of high quality silicon is required. So there is no shortage of silicon. US and Germany are the suppliers. But China accounts for 90% of the gallium and about 80% of the germanium supply. Again, there is no big issue here because, at least, except for maybe some short term headaches, because Germany, Kazakhstan, and Russia were also suppliers of this. But why did they stop? Because there was predatory supplies. Were China was dumping the world with these stuffs with predatory pricing. So naturally, the
Okay.
others had to go off the supply chain. So as of now, it is China, but it, in the true sense, is not a long term choke point. Now, some of the things, if we need to understand, chips are so tiny that we talked about. We are talking about nanometer and things like that in the processing. So dust particles can ruin the circuitry during manufacturing. So the vast factory floors have to be absolutely clean and sterile. So you can imagine, if I try and give you a picture, about a factory floor which is about six football fields put together, to keep them at 1,000 times cleaner than an operating theater in a hospital, with only dim yellow lights working, because otherwise the UV radiations will damage the chemicals which are used for protection. Also, every modification that you do for a product and every step that is made to make a product more trendy, whether it's a phone and things like that, it may imply actually resizing the chip inside. Therefore, it has implications on the manufacturing process. Now, just to give you an idea, the Intel manufacturing unit in US uses 9 billion gallons of water a year. In its California fab, the wastewater produced is toxic. It needs to be treated. So, location choice for any manufacturing unit of chips will be dictated by this as a major concern. By the way, incidentally, TSMC, the biggest chip manufacturer in the world in Taiwan, they used 97 billion liters of water in 2022. It doesn't, it's not a small quantity, the huge quantities that we're talking about. Now, when you come to distribution of the expertise, I talked about designing, manufacturing, fabrication, and all that. So let me just elaborate on that. Now, designing, which includes the somebody who makes the design, development, and R&D, is a highly skilled work. It is used. They do it using very sophisticated software for which US has monopoly, and one odd firm in UK called ARM. Otherwise, US has absolute monopoly on this. And this part of the chip manufacturing is called the fabless. Fab relates to fabrication. So the designing involves no physical work. So it is called fabless. Okay. Next part is the fab. That is a fabrication. That is a manufacturing part. Now, manufacturing part, the companies which do manufacturing are called foundries. They're very specialized foundries. We just saw the requirement of sterile environment, the water requirement, the electricity requirement. These are huge, ultra clean, modern factories. Now, clean, that is just a small part. The machineries which they use are so advanced, for deposition, for resist, which I had just made a quick mention, for lithography and for etching, that again only a handful of countries in the world make them. So one choke point is the countries which make them, the companies which make them. The other choke point is where the fabricating units are, the factories are. So these and all these require very highly skilled manpower, the skilled engineers. So we have seen designing. Next was the fabrication, the fab, and the third part is called the ATP. That is assembly, testing, and packaging. Again, these are very highly specialized. It isn't like just screwing and assembling. And the Singapore and Malaysia have very highly specialized ATP units. Some of the other countries also have, but these are the main two hubs. Now, nearly every chip in the world uses software from at least one of the US based companies. Cadence, Synopsys, or Mentor. Mentor is a German company but located in the US. So you can see the kind of monopoly which is coming onto designing. Unless you design, you go nowhere. So the that is how the choke points in semiconductor industry is distributed. Now, just to get put all these into a condensed form, let's take the journey of a typical chip. One chip. It could be designed by using blueprints from a Japanese-owned UK-based company. Let's say the company has the ARM. That's a company, UK-based company, by a team of engineers in US and Israel who use design software, highly specialized US software, which is made by US. Now they buy ultra pure silicon wafers and specialized gases and chemicals from just the handful of companies in Japan. And the design is carved into silicon. The fabrication is carried out using the most advanced and precision machinery to etch, deposit, measure layers of material, etc., using machinery and tools produced by just 5 companies in the world. One is Dutch, one is a Japanese company, and three of them are US. And incidentally, of all these tools, lithography tools are the most critical, and you will let me emphasize it here. The most advanced lithography tools in the world are made by just one company in the world, which is called the ASML company. It's a Dutch company, but they have developed all these lithography expertise using with the help, total help of United States. Now, so without these advanced chips are impossible to make. Now, after all this process is gone through, then it goes into the ATP, assembly, testing, and packaged. Mostly, the expertise lies in Southeast Asia. The thereafter it goes. The chips go to China and other countries for assembly into a phone or into other devices. So, some of the supply chain hubs. Let's just you've seen the summary of how the the where the hubs lie and where the points of vulnerable points are. I'll just touch upon some of these countries. Let's take Taiwan first. Taiwan is the world's foundry. Every, anybody may design, but for fabrication, for making it, it is mostly goes to Taiwan. Taiwan is called the fab of the world. It is home to thousands of semiconductor related companies. They collectively handle every aspect of manufacturing. TSMC alone, just that one company manufactures 50% of the world's semiconductors. They produce chips for numerous clients, including Apple, AMD, Nvidia, Qualcomm, etc. TMC, by the way, used about 5% of all of Taiwan's electricity in 2021. Well, I talked about water. Now I'm mentioning about electricity, and this consumption is set to rise to about 7% by end of this year. Now, Taiwan is the fab of the world we've seen. Next is South Korea. Now, within South Korea, Samsung produces semiconductors for its own devices. For all the semiconductors, most semiconductors within Samsung devices are produced in-house by Samsung. Samsung, therefore, is called the IDM, Integrated Device Manufacturer. Unlike I spoke about fab and fabless companies, most of the fabless they just do design and send the design to companies like TSMC in Taiwan for manufacturing, whereas in Taiwan, in Samsung, they design and produce there itself. But they are also they in addition to making it for themselves, because they have huge capacities, they also manufacture for a lot of others. The other 17% of the global foundry market is in South Korea. Next is Japan. Japan has a specialization to the tune of 50% of this semiconductor material, the chemicals and the gases and the wafers and all which I mentioned, and 30% of the equipment, the machinery required to make software, the semiconductors. Next, let's take US produces 12% of world's chip manufacturing. By incidentally, around 1990, US was producing about 40% of the world's chips. It has gone down gradually to it had gone down to about 20% by about 2005 or so, and today it's only about 13%. So rest everything has gone to Taiwan for manufacturing. The US companies, but US companies, although they produce only 12% of the world's or 9 to 12% of the world's chips, US based companies where the headquarters are US, but the manufacturing plant may be elsewhere. So the US owned companies who account for about 46% of the global total semiconductor market. So you see that although it is not manufactured there, they hold, they have control over a large quantity, almost about half. A lot of US companies operate fabrication plants in Japan and other countries. Now, coming to China, China produces about 9% of the chips now. They plan to boost it to about 25% by 2030. And they also happen to be the world's largest chip market. So as a region, putting all this together, East Asia produces about 90% of all memory chips, 75% of all processor, that is logic chips, 80% of all silicon wafers. China produces 15% of the chips, but all mostly low tech ones and heavily subsidized by the Chinese government. South Korea, about 45% of all memory chips. And let's say the Silicon Valley's knowledge uh, can easily be relocated. That's a very important thing we need to note. Whereas the fabrication units which lie in, let's say, places like Taiwan cannot be relocated. They're very difficult, huge investments, and we've seen the water, electricity, infrastructure, and all. So that's something which we need to note. The And also, for you may make the best of fabrication unit spending 10 to 20 billion dollars, but that fabrication process will remain state of the art only for 2 to 3 years. Thereafter, there are modifications, upgradation. So another thing which we need to notice that the global semiconductor industry spends to the tune of over $100 billion annually on capex expenditure. That's a huge expenditure. In fact, in 21 and 22, this was actually even higher. It was $150 billion. Now, going a little deeper into the concentration of expertise or choke points, five firms in the world, control 90% of the wafers, the start point. And even within that, there are two Japanese firms which control three-fifths. Taiwan produces 37% of world's new computing power every year. That's very huge. And two Korean firms which I mentioned produce 44% of the world's memory chips. And don't forget, I mentioned, one must emphasize this: the Dutch company ASML builds 100% of the world's lithography machine. No
Okay.
country, no company can become a chip manufacturer unless you have those lithography machines. And ASML is the only country which can supply you with advanced lithography machines. Similarly, there are GPUs. These are graphic processing unit. Nvidia is the monopoly in it. The entire global supply of photoresist, that's a chemical which is put on the wafers before it is put through lithography machine, controlled by just a cluster of companies in US, Germany, Japan, and Korea. So the also we must understand that a quarter of chip industry's revenue comes from mobile phones. Much of the cost of a mobile phone goes into the cost of semiconductors. A dozen semiconductors, you need about a dozen of semiconductors to make a smartphone, but they are all advanced ones. A modern car takes about 1,000. Very advanced electric cars may need about 3,000 or so. So the iPhones, by the way, use some of the most advanced processors, but none of them made by Apple. Made mean manufactured. So the memory cards from Japan's Kioxia, radio frequency comes from a US firm, audio comes from again a US firm. The iPhone operating system processors, the processor is designed by Apple, and there's only one company in the world which can manufacture it, and that is the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. So we see the expertise lies in different pockets, but in very few pockets, in very few countries, and in very few companies. So I think that is something which I wanted to highlight about the supply chain and the choke.
I think so that was very, very elaborate. In fact, it will take 2 3 listening for our audience to actually understand the entire process. हिंदी में मैं इसको बड़ी छोटे शब्दों में एक्सप्लेन करने की कोशिश करूंगा। देखिए, रिक्वायरमेंट बहुत ज़्यादा है, लेकिन बनाने वाले बहुत कम हैं। प्रोसेस जो है इसको बनाने का, सिलिकॉन वेफर से लेकर के फाइनली फैब्रिकेशन और फिर असेंबलिंग और पैकेजिंग तक का, 5 स्टेजेस हैं, लेकिन किसी के पास भी इंडिपेंडेंट मोनोपोली नहीं है, सैमसंग को छोड़ के, जिसका उसके पास खुद एक आईडीएम मॉडल है, बट बाकी सभी लोग जो हैं दे आर डिपेंडेंट ऑन समथिंग और द अदर। एक इसमें एक्सेप्शन ये भी है लिथोलॉजी का, जो लिथोग्राफ जो है पूरा का पूरा एएसएमएल के पास है। तो मैं चोक पॉइंट्स की बात इसलिए कर रहा था कि अगर इन्होंने अपना रोक दिया कुछ, suppose the ASML decides they will not send the lithographic machinery or technology to China, China will go down. So fabrication के मामले में critical areas हैं, चाहे वो इनिशियल जो रेयर अर्थ हो, या फिर जहां से वो सिलिकॉन को प्रोसेस करते हो, जो माइनिंग करते हैं, वहां पर भी जो काम हो रहा है, कहीं भी अगर आप उसको इंटरफेयर करेंगे तो पूरी की पूरी इंडस्ट्री इफेक्ट हो जाती है, क्योंकि इंटरडिपेंडेंस है। जैसा कि जॉन कृष्णन ने बताया कि किसी एक चिप को बनाने के लिए किसी कंट्री में टेक्नीशियंस हैं, किसी कंट्री में सॉफ्टवेयर डेवलपर्स हैं, डिजाइनिंग जर्मनी और यूएस में हो रही है। तो इतनी इंटरडिपेंडेंसी है पांचों के पांचों बिग फाइव जिसको बोलते हैं, साउथ कोरिया, जापान, जो आपको दिखाया गया, साउथ कोरिया, जापान, यूएस, चाइना। और कुछ एक टेक्नोलॉजी तो इतनी क्रिटिकल है कि इफ समथिंग हैपेंस टू देम, देन द एंटायर चिप इंडस्ट्री विल फॉल। व्हाट इज द इम्प्लीकेशंस? योर एंटायर डिफेंस एंड सिविल इलेक्ट्रॉनिक जो मार्केट है ना आपका, वो पूरा का पूरा इफेक्ट होगा। कोविड में इसका बहुत गहरा असर पड़ा था, जिसमें कि इनका काफी सप्लाई चेन में इम्पैक्ट पड़ा था। सर, वी विल मूव ऑन टू द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन। आई डोंट वांट
Yeah.
टू गो इन फर्दर डिटेल्स बिकॉज it will take more time, you know. So our next question is very briefly, sir. Why did first of all US, pull the rug or pull the plug from the Chinese? One, and two, what are the initiatives which the US is now typically taking to ensure that China doesn't, move ahead? The targets which you said, 25% growth from 9%. Currently, it is only manufacturing 9% of chips. It is going to aim for 25%. It is only doing low end chips, low quality chips, or I would say low end chips, not the high end variety which are used for weapon systems, etc. Why has
Yeah.
US done this, and what are the initiatives which they are taking to ensure that this whole supply chain doesn't get disrupted, sir?
Okay. Thank you for that, Dushyant, again, for explaining it so briefly, so nicely. I'll first touch upon some of the initiatives and then we look at China. Maybe it'll just give a sequence. I must also say Intel also does the entire process,
Okay, okay,
like like Samsung.
correct,
The other aspect is, you know, um, one foundry establishing to set up a new foundry can cost something upward of about $10 billion, and like I said, it has to be upgraded, on a yearly basis. So this capex requirement almost every year. And most semiconductor companies, I said, they send their designs to independent foundries,
okay.
barring these one or two, Samsung and Intel. So, there are the big points are manufacturing expertise is one requirement,
Mm-hmm.
economy of scale. See, if you produce millions and millions of chips, you can bring down the cost to what we had shown in the beginning, $2,
$2,
$1. If
$1.
somebody was to make just a handful of them, he
Yeah,
will
it'll be very cost.
probably require thousands of dollars to make one or so. So the
Correct.
economy of scale can only keep you, give you the flexibility to do upgradations regularly.
Mhm.
And the market demand is very important. Something which had happened during the COVID was the entire car market demand went down.
Fell down.
It fell down, and there was a spurt in the demand for computers and processors.
Correct.
Therefore, the manufacturing units focused on to those. As the COVID situation improved and car markets demand again went up, it takes them time to reorient. So therefore, there's a backlog which is yet to be cleared even today. Now,
Correct.
why the initiatives? There are a great deal of initiatives have been taken by the United States, and why it has been done is, we touched initially on the entire cross spectrum of economy. National security today does not deal only with defense. It involves your economy, your info,
Yes, sir.
your cyber, everything. So, and
Correct.
for all these, semiconductor has become central. You go
Correct.
nowhere without you may not make, but unless you have an assured supply
Supply.
and a secure chip, which you are not scared that there is some backdoor leaf left in that, through which
Yeah.
information or the what you're doing
Then,
can be leaked.
yeah.
Yeah, so therefore it is central to everything, the entire national security. And therefore the United States also, especially with the Huawei's Chinese Huawei companies 5G initiatives and all, uh, nobody could have competed with them for the pricing.
Correct.
They had the required standards and the pricing can come because from two things. One is your, let's say, these things. One is the processes you have. Second is hugely subsidized. China
Ah,
subsidized and threw everybody out of the market for rare earths. They became a monopoly. They could do
correct.
the same for semiconductors. They could do the same for the entire communication, the 5G network of the world. Which country would want to set up its entire 5G network, let's say at uh, 5 times the cost, using the other costlier equipment from Europe or US, compared to China, which says ki, it's just a fraction of a cost, you take it. So
Correct.
that was the danger which they were facing, plus the danger of some of their during COVID they realized that we cannot even depend on friendly offshoring to countries which are very friendly with us, like let's say Taiwan or Japan. These are all, by the way, incidentally on very high earthquake zones. Taiwan, Japan, and things like that. Earthquake, tsunami, war disruption, any other disruption. So therefore, US felt a very compelling need to get back its fabrication capability. See, for everything else, they have no worry. Whether it is designing AT&P and things like that, their worry is the fabrication, the manufacture, which we saw. So that
Okay.
is what they are basically trying to do uh, in both. One is in country in their own, domestic production within US, and the other is in the countries which are away from Southeast Asia also. Like
Okay.
India may qualify for it because of that, but then geographical location alone is not. We saw how complex the fab,
Yes, sir.
expenditure, electricity, and all are required.
Okay.
So that is one of the reasons. Though some of the initiatives, if we just name them, it is the new Chip and Science Act of 2020, which almost bans supply to China, not only the products, but even chips made using US technology. Now
Mm-hmm.
that has huge implications. If a Taiwanese, let's say TSMC uses design technology or machinery which is made using the Chinese US technology, the Chinese cannot make advanced chips from them. The Taiwanese will not make it for them. Similarly, if a lithography machine, they made with US technology, Dutch, and Dutch will, in any case, they are in league with, they have to be with the US. So if they don't get, like you mentioned so rightly, you cannot make a lithography, a fab factory.
Correct.
Uh, the Chinese reportedly are capable of manufacturing today 7 nm processors, but the problem
Okay.
is they cannot make it to scale.
Oh,
Now, the one of the issues about defense industry is that defense industry requires two categories. One is the let's say a small quantity of very high end chips. Other is a comparatively larger quantity of legacy chips. Now, when I
okay.
say legacy chips, let's say if we run a fabrication factory, we will say that commercially it is unviable to produce these chips, because they all are no use. Nobody is going to buy this model. But
Correct.
defense industry, unlike mobile phones and the cars and all, we want the defense equipment to last for 3 decades, 4 decades,
Yeah, almost,
some
but
even
almost
yeah,
40 years, 50 years.
very true. So some large quantities of chips required are legacy chips. So you
Okay.
need both. Now what happens is, even that large quantity, you know the entire defense, US defense, the tech industries inputs for the US defense industry may be under 2% of their production cost. So they are not worried about them. They have to look at their main customers, which are the commercial requirements.
Okay.
Therefore, it is very difficult to get the precise requirements of the defense industry. Therefore, there has to be some government control for making sure that you get what you want. So the Chinese, although they may have, in the short run, they may have capability to produce just a little bit. It is very difficult for them, firstly, for their defense production itself. Secondly, they are the world's main market for semiconductors, because whether it's a washing machine or a vacuum floor cleaner everything is made by them. So all these semiconductors go there, that is put into a device and then sold. So
Correct.
the entire economy of China, the labors, the factories, everything will come to a standstill. Second
Okay.
aspect is, the Chinese had also realized over a period of time that, let's say, Apple, you could have a label saying that it is manufactured in China, but what was happening was, when the end user buys a device, bulk of the cost money goes to the Apple US Apple firm, out of which bulk goes to the semiconductor people who are produced it, and a very
Okay.
small amount goes to the Chinese people who have actually assembled it. So China wanted to upgrade their, they come up in the value chain, so they were looking for, by all means, by hook and crook, by theft, by buying off companies, semiconductor companies, by employing people as their consultant, paying them huge amount of remuneration, trying to get the technology. They have succeeded to a certain extent, but they are still lagging behind in a great measure. Therefore, probably these sanctions of which United States has placed to come just in time. Even today, it's believed that about 30% of the important ingredients cost wise in the Huawei system is US made.
Okay.
Now, because of these sanctions, the entire, Huawei's the smartphone unit is most probably being wound up. The
Oh.
entire 5G rollout plan of China is most probably getting delayed. So
Hmm.
that is a kind of impact. Now you can imagine the overall impact it will make on the entire industry. Their plans for AI, they were almost on the verge of being the superpowers of AI in the
Yeah.
world. Yeah, so it is going to have an impact on all that. But what has happened is, in the interim, they've actually managed, there is very fierce competition between all these people, whether it is AMD, whether it is Intel. So the moment one of the companies go, take a larger market share, the other one finds ways and means to get more funding and bigger market share. So they do a JV with Chinese who are sniffing around. They'll say, okay, we will fund you, we will buy shares, we'll get into a joint venture, set up a factory in China. We want technology. So some of them have actually shared technology, including, let's say, Intel partially and AMD, it is believed. But
Okay.
still, despite all this, they are lagging behind, and maybe these sanctions have come just in time.
Okay.
So that's in very brief about where the defense industry fits in. I have just made a passing mention,
Yeah.
and why these sanctions were required, and what is the impact of those.
Okay, sir, I think we've covered a lot of ground. People would have got a huge perspective on what is semiconductor, what are chips, how what goes into manufacturing, where they can be choked, where they can be actually strangled by the Americans. Americans still hold all the cards, basically because other than China, the rest of the four countries are by and large in the US camp, whether you take Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Netherlands. They're all basically Germany. So they're basically
Absolutely.
all being controlled by the US. So the Chinese are all alone in this particular field. I would have had some more questions, but I'll leave that for the next time, sir. The last question, briefly, 3 4 minutes, and then we'll go for quick question answers of the audience, and that is, what's the Indian perspective? Because ultimately we started off with this, that what is the Indian perspective? A brief forward on that, sir.
Okay, okay. I must say that, I did emphasize a little more on the supply chain and the choke points, because the entire semiconductor dynamics lies there. And that is the reason
Correct.
why I was trying to emphasize that. And now, coming to India's mission, we have a government owned semiconductor lab which was set up in Mohali and started production as early as 1984.
Okay.
And it is, some reports say that they had the capability to produce uh, 800 nanometer processors, which were just about few years, about 3 to 4 years behind what was the cutting edge those days.
Right.
Now this needs a little bit of confirmation, but in all probability it is true. And very it was very strange that in 89 there was a fire in that factory,
Mm-hmm.
which led to its closure till 1997. 20,
Oh,
what is that?
almost,
20,
almost.
25 years?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's
What a
huge.
century. Just imagine. Now, there is also a initiative in 2010 to revive it. There were people who were prepared to revive it in the form of a JV, but it was ignored by the government, saying that they didn't probably want to invest in it, because they felt that the chips were coming so cheap. Why should you invest in it? I mean, a very
Oh,
short-sighted view, I
very,
must say,
very,
but
very,
probably
very
that
short.
was, yeah.
Very, very
You
short-sighted
know,
as
even Bell had set up a fab. Bell had a fab to start with, but
well. Wow.
the entire the you know the but the chips were being available in the global market at such cheap rates, and such advanced processors, so they could not keep pace. Naturally, we all know what happens in a PSU, and also, to be fair, we must say that we do have constraints of funding. At least till very recently, we are much better off now, so that must have been the reason. So, as of now, we are exploring options to revive the semiconductor lab. The government has come out with a 10 billion subsidy package, as part of India's semiconductor mission,
Mm-hmm.
ready to fund 50% setting up cost of fab and ATP facilities in India.
Mm-hmm.
Vedanta says, even after fact Foxconn left them, that the first Indian chips they will make and put it in the market by 2025. Maybe
Yes.
there will be some slippage, but probably they will be able to do it. They have hired a very reputed veteran of chips called Mr. David Reed. Let's see how it goes ahead. Dolera in Gujarat is being designated and developed as India's future semiconductor hub.
Okay.
Some software work is already in designing, is already in taking place in Bangalore. In the
Mm-hmm.
entire supply chain, there is large number of Indians lying all
Okay.
over the world.
Yeah,
So
that's very important.
it's a very, very important workforce. Even if we get 10% of them or something, we may have plus we have people who can be skilled. The amount of good quality engineers we churn out are probably the highest in the world. Dolera, by the way, also has bespoke ingredient. These are the specialized chemical that are required. India's
Okay.
biggest chemical plants are located in Dolera, so it will not be difficult for them to make those. That is the idea.
Okay.
Micron has committed $2.7 billion for a ATP, setup in about 60 kilometers from Dolera, and one of
Okay.
the firms which are suppliers to Micron, Simtech, they are also
Mm-hmm.
setting up an establishment near the Micron site. By the way, the Micron factory's work is already commenced.
Okay.
Government of India has also planned a GPU cluster. There is a Rajasthan-based factory, a firm called Saharsa Semiconductors. They have set up, they have set to produce India's first memory chips. Maybe basic ones, but all the same Indian ones. But sometime during next year, maybe early next year, AMD of US plans to invest about 400 million in India in the next 5 years, and they plans to establish their largest design facility in Bangalore. Now that will be a big asset.
Mhm.
The SEL fab, which I just talked about, the one which was closed till 97 and all, is being there are plans to revive that.
Revive that.
The Japanese are also in MOU to produce some. HCL is in planning some. Foxconn is in discussion with the TSMC, the global leading player, to set up a fab in India.
Mhm.
And India is also selected what is called a RISC 5 open source.
Okay.
This that's an open source based on which you can make. You don't have to pay anybody. Nobody has the IP. Using that, you can make designs and the other softwares for semiconductor. And what you make, you can actually license it.
Something
So
like, sir,
that is a
Linux, something like a Linux kind of a concept.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. A lot of countries are working on it, including China. So once you make, derivative out of it, you can make that derivative actually closed and make it a proprietary item, or you can leave it as open and free. So you have a
Anybody else can.
choice. So that is what has been taken. So that is where India is. But as of today, we are importing near 100% of our requirement. Some of
Okay.
the chips which are used in our space mission and all, I must say that in the let's say in the aviation and all, you will rarely use a most advanced chip. You will use something which has been proven over over a
We-
long period of time.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
most of ours is imported. About 110 billion is what our
we get.
import should hit in 2030. By 2030, 110 billion worth. But
Okay.
with all these things that are happening, it appears quite likely that we will have a reasonable the base level uh, base level
Indigeni-
chip
indigenization.
capability. Yeah, indigenization.
Indigenization. Okay.
And we must also focus on alliances, on secure trusted alliances.
Okay.
Israel may be one country which comes straight to our mind, some of the European countries, US certainly, but Israel also stands out. They also have designing capability, so we could
Sir,
combine with them. So that's, yeah.
so thank you very much. I think it was a very, very elaborate discussion. Our audience would have definitely benefited from it. Those who are the Hindi uh, group would have also understood. I have tried to in between interject the हिंदी थॉट को उसमें डालने की कोशिश की है। इंडिया की जो सिचुएशन है इस समय ये है कि हम अपना पूरा का पूरा जो रिक्वायरमेंट है हम इंपोर्ट करते हैं 100 ऑड बिलियन 2030 तक हो जाएगा हमारा। लेकिन हमारे पास कुछ हैं बेस लेवल फैसिलिटीज़ हैं और कुछ फॉरेन इन्वेस्टर्स आ रहे हैं, माइक्रॉन हो गया, फॉक्सकॉन हो गया, एएमडी होगी, तो ये लोग धीरे-धीरे इंडिया में इन्वेस्टमेंट कर रहे हैं। इन द कमिंग ईयर्स आई थिंक वी शुड बी एबल टू आर-एन-डी में ज़्यादा हमको लगाने की ज़रूरत है। पॉजिटिविटी ये है कि वर्कफ़ोर्स जो है फॉरेन कंट्रीज़ में भी जो है, उसमें इंडियंस की जो स्ट्रेंथ है वो काफ़ी है। उसका अगर हम 10 से 20% भी हमारे पास आ जाता है, so I think we'll be able to kickstart a little faster. There's a need for a focus in this area, sir. And request to the audience, please like, subscribe, and watch our videos. Share it as far as possible, as far and wide as possible. We are trying to give you some very quality discussion. आपको ऐसा डिस्कशन कहीं नहीं मिलेगा, किसी भी चैनल पे नहीं मिलेगा। Rhetorics होंगे, लेकिन substance you will find only on Strive India. And for that, I must thank John Krishnan, sir. Few questions, sir. First question is from Brigadier Bhatia. He says, modern military strength is derived from microchips and computing power. It is perplexing that China struggles capabilities such as AC engines earlier and chips now, despite its pursuit of global hegemony. So if you want to respond a
Yeah,
little bit.
I think very, very quickly I'll respond. That's very right. But from what I explained about the way chip supply chain is distributed, the choke points are. That is the reason, and it is not easy to develop the all these technologies. And I think General Dushyant also emphasized that one case in point of a lithography machine. So
Yes.
therefore, it'll take them time, but knowing China, it is just that they will lag behind. And unlike other things, it is not so easy to catch up. It may take them maybe a few years, not in the immediate future, maybe a decade or so to catch up if the
Some,
sanctions remain.
correct. Some another questions. Our biggest concern is NVIDIA, NVIDIA's codenamed Hopper GPUs. These GPUs are extremely good in AI. So it's just given a
Yeah, yeah.
brief comment.
Nvidia is supposed to be. They had produced. They were this, near monopoly for what is called GPUs. That is
Yes.
graphic processing unit, which actually does parallel processing. They are for pictures, videos, and things like that, which by default happen to be the best suited for AI. Therefore, the NVIDIA's chips, GPU chips, and NVIDIA is the leading supplier of chips for all AI applications as of today.
Yeah. There are other questions by him, but since we are running out of time, we will be skipping those questions. There is a question from Partha P. DJ Wali Babu is responding to one of the questions which he had put. After a rate tracing bubble, crypto bubble, this AI bubble will also burst. When the next bubble starts, buy old bubbles, product at slashed prices. So this is a comment which he has given.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He is, the crux of, let's say, if I have to respond, what I'll say is, let's say COVID and the demands went down.
Mhm.
Now, just imagine the fab units which are which have to have millions and billions of orders for the chips, otherwise they cannot cut break even, they
Correct.
cannot maintain the facility. So the entire thing is based on a constant steady flow of demand. The moment there is a break in demand, or let's say tomorrow there is a revolutionary technology that comes up, there would be a problem. But these take time to come up, so disruption cannot happen, in a hurry.
Okay. Uh, Information point. Intel is the major shareholder of ASML along with IBM, Samsung, and others. Just, for information. Uh, Colonel RP is saying India wants to make chip making superpower, seizing on world's desire to reduce reliance on China. Emergence as a global hub for electronics manufacturing and design. Will India get full success, and by when? Actually,
Okay.
it's a long way. It's a long
Yeah,
way for
no,
India.
but I think very very yeah. Firstly, it's a long way. Secondly, the world is not dependent on China for chips.
And that's what I was telling you. The way you have explained it, now things are
Yeah,
getting more and more clearer.
yeah. But what we need to do is, the world is dependent on the Chinese electronic products.
Yes.
Everything comes from China. Whether you go and buy a simple toy also today, if it has got anything electronic in it, you will be disappointed if you turn around and say that it's from China. But every chip into it goes mostly not from China, it comes from elsewhere. So it isn't so much that the China is a chip making, powerhouse. No, not as of now. It'll take them some time because of these sanctions. But the problem is, it's a vicious circle. But fortunately, most of the electronic equipment that we want, they need, the not legacy, but not state of the art chips. So even, I must say, even during these, with all these sanctions in place, Huawei still has no restrictions on getting the 4G level chips from the US and other countries. It's
Okay.
only what they have, they have been also been very smart. The leading, the cutting edge technology chips they are not giving.
Right.
In fact,
Right.
there are a large number of chips which they feel, there is a typical word for it, which they feel, below the dignity to keep it licensed. So those are all
Okay.
available. So
Okay.
the problem comes out of that.
Okay. Next question is from Khandilwal Vinod. He's Colonel. To what extent are chip read computer based systems susceptible to EMP? And if so, how does one guard against it in conflict situations? Some countries have supposedly experimented with EMP weapons.
I think, Dushan, you must keep this question for some time when you get a specialist,
Yeah.
somebody who's
Even-
a science
Yeah,
specialist. We were giving a perspective of semiconductors, as it impacts the world. The
correct.
So I think, I'm not saying your question is not a highly relevant question, and I'm sure I too have
From
this doubt. But
from a
the
military yeah, from a military
yeah,
perspective, it's an important question. The only thing is, what I have read in our staff college exams in science and miltech is that EMP does have an impact on all the semiconductors and transistors and also these chips, etc. But
yeah,
beyond that, I think my knowledge is also limited.
yeah.
Maybe some guy who's dealing with it would be more capable of doing it, sir. A question from General Chaturvedi, keeping in view huge quantity of water and electricity. I was expecting this question from him. Required for fabrication of microchip. China has major challenge. Your comments, please.
Absolutely right, sir. You're right. Not only China, every country will have, and it's not just when it comes to water. It's not just the availability of water. Firstly, it is pure water. It has to be of a very high quality. It can't be from any of the rivers, not just in India. Even the most the rivers around the world have very polluted water. They are all polluted. So the quality of water is very high. That is one. I mentioned the huge quantity that is required in billions of liters. The second point is the wastewater is toxic, so it
Hmm.
has to be treated before it is let out. So that is again another point. So truly speaking, not just a problem for China. China being what one very autocratic model may still be able to make it, but countries like us or anybody else anywhere else in the world, it is a problem,
Yeah.
not insurmountable, but a problem to be solved. Absolutely, thank you very much for that question.
In fact, there are so many questions that it is becoming difficult for me to now take all of them, except for the fact that I will flash this one because the pollution caused by nature by processing lethanoids, rare elements, caused the transfer of technology from West to China, which begs the question: should India invest in this
Yeah,
technology? It's a very important question.
yeah, yeah,
We need to be careful about it. I think linked to the first question, what Jan
yeah.
Chaturvedi was also referring to. So,
Absolutely. Now, I should I take it on?
yeah, 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 absolutely, sir.
Okay. All right. I will just give you a comparison of rare earths. In the 80s, US was the largest rare earth supplier in the world. And the supply chains were in US, Germany, Japan, etc., for making predominantly what is called permanent magnets. Now, again, rare earth processing from the ore to the processed rare earth is a very polluting process. Again, not that it cannot be done; it can be done, but it's very polluting. Now, what happened in, let's say, a democracy like ours or US? They have a they had the one of the ores, the I think it was mountain top ore, which used to produce the maximum rare earths. They The amount of toxic water, uh, which by the way incidentally also contained a very small fraction of some nuclear material, was stored in huge tanks which would resemble lakes, I must say. Now there is a your capacity for uh, cleansing those and taking, leaving them, bringing them to a level where you can actually let them out to the field or into some other water body or rivers and all, is so high that they were case filed against them, and they, like a typical democracy, there was no cost benefit if they were to do that. And that was the same time when China was coming out, competing with the US. They started competing. China, being China, could have shown utter disregard, or they may not like to hear this, but let's say fair amount of disregard to the environmental issues to start with. So while the US was fighting cases, the company in their own country and paying for the the refining the affluents that were being let out, the Chinese were flooding the market with very cheap rare earths. So this company had to close down, the US company,
Okay.
and gradually everything shifted to China. The Chinese, contacted the company, said, "Would you like to shift base to China? We will give you subsidy." After few years, they said, "You'll have to take a partner." After few years, they said, "You have to take a, share the technology." So therefore, they slowly built the supply chain. The same way, even for this, so you have to strike a balance. Nothing, even let's say, what do we do with the billions of solar panels that we are putting up today? The whole world,
Yeah.
at some time or the other, they have to be disposed of.
Correct.
What you can recycle from them, maybe at best, let's say, let's put a tentative figure of 30%, 40%, very high, that it unlikely to be that high. What do we do with the rest? So therefore, all these have a problem, partial solutions, partial problems will remain. It's for us to solve. But yes, you are absolutely right. This, you have to contend with it. Like the water problem, which we just touched upon before this, the problem will be there. But we have to strike a balance and meet both the requirements.
Uh, there are questions. We'll take just the last question, because the rest I
Okay.
will ask the audience to forgive us, because the time
or,
is actually.
they can even mail it or something, and we
Yeah,
can
yeah,
discuss one to one,
absolutely.
no problem.
You can email it to either Strive India, or
Yeah, yeah, I think that'll be
Strive India.
better. Yeah.
I'll pass it on to the general, and he would respond to all your questions. So therefore, I'll end except with the last question, because that is general's think tank. So I can't I can't ignore this question. 7 less than chip are critical. What percentage China produces, and what can India contribute to it in
Oh,
future, near
okay,
future?
okay. Okay. Since it is from Indus International, I must answer this question. Dishit.
Yeah.
Look,
I,
like, you may recollect, I mentioned during the, while answering one of the questions which General Dushin had asked, that China reportedly has produced 7 nm chips, but they do not have the capability to produce it
okay.
to scale.
Correct.
So it's just a handful. Now, criticality, yes. While the latest smartphone, which may come out next year, may have Apple iPhone may have 3 nm, 7 nm is a very, you can say, as good as a cutting edge technology. For India to get this will take time. As of now, we are looking at 40 nm and beyond. But that is by no means anything less. In fact, that's a right way to pitch. We couldn't be pitching for 3 or 5 or 7 right in the beginning. Also, if you see from the market point of view, what we need in large quantities, huge quantities, are those, not 7 nm and all. That is for, yes, high end purposes, which we
Correct.
may be still be able to procure from some of the friendly countries. I don't think, because the quantity required may not be so high, because we
Correct.
are not yet started making so many such large quantities of electronic equipment. So the way I look at things, I think it's the track on which we are traveling is quite fine.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. In fact, we had a wonderful discussion. Thank you, audience. Please like, subscribe, and watch our channel as much as possible for good information. All those who have got their questions can email to us. You have our email in the description, or and we will try to respond to it through the through Janal Krishnan. Also, I would like to appreciate one of the audience of ours, DJ Wale Babu. Although he name is a little catchy, but he has asked some very relevant questions
Yeah.
on, and also given information on China, especially on China. So thank you very much. People can look at his questions and the response which he has given for their further enhancement of knowledge. Thank you very much, sir, and Jai Hind, Jai
Thank you.
Bharat, and a very good
Thank,
evening to you
thank
and
you
to
very
everybody.
much, Jal Dushan. Thank you very much to Colonel RP also. And thank you very much, everyone, for listening in. And certainly, we will at least go through the questions, not so much to reply, but to educate ourselves. This is a
Absolutely.
topic on which there's so much of knowledge lying all around.